Professor. Welcome everybody to the guys from Wirral Club. Glad to see you all and everybody else that's come this evening. Tonight's talk is about the SOE, Special Operation Executive. It started in 1940. The behind-the-scenes battle that took place. This will work. What was it? Is that clear? Or was it get out of focus? A bit better. No. What was it? Churchill, Winston Churchill, famously stirring command in 1940 as Prime Minister. Not wanted, not loved, not wanted by anybody, and certainly Lord Halifax and the rest of the Tory party, that he was not really the man for the job, but he actually was. He decided, his background was a lot to do with South Africa in the Boer War, that how the guerrilla war and the ungentlemanly way of fighting was very effective. So he decided that we wanted to have something to fight. It carries this oddly high romance echo of knightly crusades, an idea that the course of the war could be influenced not only by disciplined regiments like of the Third Reich, where everything had to have a plan, but it could be people who were oddballs, individuals with a thirst for jeopardy and a talent for sabotage, with the greatest ability to keep things quiet. From the start then, the SOE formed in Baker Street, directly drawn because of Churchill's inspiration. It operated within departments, it wasn't controlled by any one department. That's what the army didn't like. They didn't like the SOE because it was actually formed without any of their consent. The Navy didn't want it, the RAF didn't want it. So the ethos of the SOE was everything in opposition to what the Third Reich machine was, the Nazi war machine, whose relentless shockwaves, as you know, went through all the Poland, it went through all the states and through France. It literally just pulverized anything in its way and occupied Paris. So, with the SOE, the conception was to undermine the Nazi occupation across Europe, was to destabilize it from within, to have agents who could aid local resistance groups, and fight from within, missions to blow up railway lines, bridges and power stations. And more increasingly, they discovered later on in the war that women were actually more effective than men at assuming identities and being able to be carrying out with their work completely unseen. It was opposite to the Blitzkrieg. It was a long game, a tactical game. Ingenuity, unbelievable daring and skill to blend into what other surroundings could offer. You ever tried to blend into a city that you have no idea what it's like and its people, to try to fit in without being conspicuous, was rather odd. That's the man. 65 when he took office as Prime Minister, May 1940. And as soon as he took office, well, those of you who've seen The Darkest Hour, any of you seen the film The Darkest Hour? It's nearly factually correct. You cannot argue with a tiger when your head is inside its mouth. That is the reason why I'm in this chair. He fought people. Lord Halifax was an absolute shit. In fact, Churchill had him taken out of the cabinet and sent to the ambassador in Washington to get him out of the way. But he fought long and hard to get things through. This man was the inspiration for SOE. His background was a young subaltern. He was a young lieutenant. Think back to the Victorian times, the Battle of Omdurman, 1898, 2nd of September. He took part in the last cavalry charge of the British Army, horseback, swords out, at the Mahdi, which was the Sudan-Egyptian war. It was the Fuzzy Wuzzies, as Corporal Jones would have said in Dad's army, the Fuzzy Wuzzies. He took part in that battle, the last battle over there. So he was already battle-hardened. And the reason I put this picture in is I just want to show you by an illustration. He picked up technology. People think of Churchill as an old man who was not with it. He had Professor Lindemann, who was his scientific officer. He had Professor R.V. Jones, the man that was able to tell him about bending of the beams of the Knickerbein with German bombers, dots and dashes, two beams crossing. who had 2 wristwatches, one on each arm in case one didn't work, so he knew what time it was. Churchill decided when he went out to the Sudan, he was issued with a standard service revolver. This is a 38 caliber, it's a real one, it's a DIAC. It was a .450, same as this, 6 shot. Now, if you fired your 6 shots, you've got to load them in by hand, on horseback when you've been chased by the fuzzy wuzzies. 6 shots and you're done. Churchill decided, he'd seen this on holiday. I'm going to have one of these, he said. C96 Mauser, 10 shot, single or selective, or fire them off in 10. But somebody was making a 20 shot. So at the Battle of Omdurman, he owes his life to a Mauser and to technology, because every time the fuzzy wuzzies came near him, he put one down. All the way through Churchill's career, he was a gadgets man, he loved his toys. Everything he did, let me have a go, can I have a go, can I do this? No, you can't, you're the Prime Minister. And who was he fighting? There you go. Found that in the War Archives. Which is my identity card. I don't know if anybody was brave enough to ask him for his identity card, but there you go. There you go. He had his own Tommy gun from America. He just loved gadgets. I mean, look at him. His idea was, if we're going to be invaded, I'll take one with me. There's no such thing as a good German, and best one is a dead German. So he had that wherever he went. His personal bodyguard, Thompson, used to be in despair with him because he'd take this damn thing wherever he went. But, you know, it's another story. So for those who volunteered for the SOE, it wasn't just bravery. It was the fact that once the mission started, you were on your own, deep behind enemy lines, running the risk of betrayal, somebody betraying you, thinking you're your friend. Volunteers sent out to Holland, Italy, Yugoslavia, Greece, Far East, as well as occupied Europe. They knew that capture would be the beginning of the end, and the tales of some of the torture that was carried out by the Gestapo it makes for harrowing reading. Actually, there we are. They seem to enjoy inflicting pain. But there was something about the SOE that attracted not just brilliant agents, but clever backroom boffins that created gadgets. I'll go on to this in a minute, because it still today holds true. The War Cabinet, SOE, controlled straight through. You've got MI6, and they all worked out from either London, India operations. It's quite a complicated thing, but they were completely on their own. And the chap that was charged with looking after them was Hugh Dalton. It's his job to sort it out, and he became the Chancellor of the Exchequer, virtually given a blank cheque to train these people amongst quite a bit of hostility. That's the wartime poster that just shows the cold, modernistic, Teutonic mind. That's what they were up against. So as the war progressed, SOE became more sophisticated. Simply blowing up bridges and taking out vehicles was not enough. You needed to do more. You needed to take the whole train out. So this is what they were doing. It's all very well to take a train, but if you were to get into the depot in the middle of the night and put carborundum oil into all the containers for doing all the axles on the train, within 500 miles the whole train would seize up. And then the Maquis, if they were in France, could take them all out one by one. So the idea of the SOE changed as the war progressed. They were from all walks of life, people that went. Those of you who've seen Churchill's Secret Army, it's on 5 or 6 episodes. People from all walks of life who had an aptitude were taken on. People who had foreign languages, from people who had been waiters to postmen, to deputies, diplomatics, well-to-do ladies who had been off to finishing school in France or Germany to learn another language. They were soon either picked up. If they were not right for SOE, they were sent to Bletchley Park. Cecil Pearl Witherington, born in Paris, dropped into France in '43. She began her missions and was one of the most successful selling beauty products. She had free travel, got around, linked up with the resistance. And there's some references at the end of this presentation that some of the exploits that they got up to was quite remarkable. Nancy Wake with the McKing in 44, with a standard 303 Enfield. Technology could be the indirect path. And like I said to you with Churchill, they were very big on technology. They were originally using ciphers, so SOE agents would start off that we were worried that they would have been turned by the Germans, either you work for us or you're going to get to the war. So there was always codes within their context. So it would be simple poems like Mary had a little lamb. Then the next line would be, if they didn't get that in London, the SOE agent had been got at. It was very, very hit and miss, and there was an awful lot of times when SOE agents were dropped into occupied countries and the Germans were waiting for them because they had infiltrated. So an awful lot of that went on. The drawback was at the Abwehr, the German intelligence, and the general made Admiral Canaris. Admiral Canaris actually died in a concentration camp before the end of the war because Hitler thought that he was a double agent and he was actually not a real Nazi. He was old German school who didn't approve of what they were doing. Agents caught red-handed, well, you know which route they went. At any one time in Europe, there was no less than about 470 agents working across occupied Europe. You know, the background for that, for every one of them that was transmitting there was an awful lot of people in the background that were picking up a lot of data. That data was then used if something had happened, like a bombing run or whatever. Bletchley Park were listening to the messages that were sent by Enigma. High-grade traffic, as I've told you, went by RTTY with the Geheimschreiber, the XZ42 teletype machine. Normal routine stuff went through Enigma. Bletchley was able to pick up from messages sent back from SOE. They knew then when the Germans were complaining about they were short of parts because the train had been derailed and something else. We knew what was happening, effectively. And that's when Bletchley and SOE started to work a little bit more together. That's the big one. For a radio operator, 6 weeks on average was the maximum time that anybody lived. That's quite harrowing. 6 weeks. A bit longer in places like Norway because it wasn't because of the geographical terrain, but in places like occupied France. And this is why I don't understand that, you know, in occupied France you could have directional finding equipment to find agents within weeks, and yet we've been 3 months in for OR and we're still trying to find them. Those of you that watched the Bond movies know the actor who played the part of Q was Desmond Llewellyn, but his real name in the movies was Major Boothroyd, known as Q. The Gadgets factory actually existed because Ian Fleming, that wrote the Bond movies, was involved in MI6, he was involved in SOE. He was a gadgets man. So in the Bond movies, what you actually see was a throwback from SOE, at the secret department that made all the things from the exploding cigarettes, exploding rats, the explosives disguised as coal, fake horse or cattle dung, landmines, the list was endless, and they were always on the lookout for new inventions. I've got a book that gives you, it's almost like an Argos catalogue of all the things that you could order from SOE, and it was unbelievable. Right down for people who want to have a money belt, Chris. Yeah. There's a calico money bag that you could have had. Yeah. Like I said, changing oil for lubrication to carborundum would seize bearings and then slow the train down, then strike with the resistance. It was quite anything that would pollute the water, anything that would cut off power supplies, telephone lines, it had to be indirect. But then against that you had the cash then that would be some sort of retribution from the Germans to the local population. You know, when Operation Anthropoid, when Heydrich, well, they tried to shoot him, didn't they? But the Sten gun jammed. They threw a hand grenade. He died 10 days later from blood poisoning, from horse fibres from the seat of the car that got into his body. But they were trained, SOE, Czech, dropped into Prague, 14-hour trip with a Whitley Page bomber to drop them in. They were out there for 6 months. But after that, nearly 5,000 Czechs were shot. So you have to ask, was it worth it? You know, it's what you put on it, isn't it? There you go, that's the original picture of the SOE stores, making all sorts of things. Brilliant. The boffins. Basic equipment, the Sten, the hand grenade, anything that could be disassembled and put away quickly.
No.
Anybody heard of Violet Savo? This poem was written by Leo Marx for a young woman he fell in love with called Ruth. She died. He gave it to Violet Savo that she kept with her. She kept it all the while with her when she was working. The life that I have is all that I have, and the life that I have is yours. She ended up in a concentration camp and was shot in the back of the head. Forged ID papers. Looks easy to make them today, doesn't it, on a computer, but then it must have been bloody difficult. So, think about it. You're out in the field, what have you got to contend with? The anxiety of carrying money to pay for things. Because believe it or not, even in occupied France, unless you paid people, people didn't want to do things just for the sake of it. Anything that would convince the Gestapo that you had an identity that just did not exist. Sabotage. Average age was 22 to 25. Veteran of 24. Now, I've highlighted this at the end with an asterisk. Brigadier Colin Gubbins, he was in charge of training and operations. My dad's generation always used to say, have you got the Gubbins to deal with it all? To throw back to the wartime. But Brigadier Gubbins, actually, he was the one that set up all the training camps in all the Scottish castles and whatever down in the New Forest. People were trained all over the UK. They had 24, I think it was, different sites where people would go for various training on killing people, how to live off the land, how to hide yourselves with the rest of it, mountaineering. Everybody got sent around. Brigadier Gubbins oversaw all of that. And it was very, very effective. How was it dropped? It was dropped early on by the RAF in containers. And I saw one of these for sale not so long ago, and it was going for about £400. Battered. About 6 foot long, about that wide. So you just put everything into it. And on the side of it was a shovel. So when you finished with it, you could bury it and bury the parachute. There you go. There's the container. Can you see the shovel on the side? Firearms, explosives, food, money, first aid kit, everything went in these. Type H container. 30 or 40 of those would be dropped at one time. In designated places that had been identified, and then the maquis, it was in France, would be put out. Tin cans with tallow in it, oil lamps or whatever, or torches to drop. The typical RAF, it never ever landed where it was supposed to go, and sometimes it went in the wrong place, but that's... Here we are, there's the resistance with the British kit, was the standard Sten gun. Now, preparing to board. Initially, SOE agents were dropped by parachute over hostile territory. So they had to learn to parachute on top of everything else they'd been trained for. Now, I don't like heights. So the idea of being parachuted over hostile territory from a plane at, I don't know, 3,000 feet or 4,000 feet fills me with dread. Fitting into the locality. She could be there for 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, just locally, just working on the farm. But at night time, she was doing SOE work. That's it. Going through the hole, as they called it. Well, an SOE agent going out through a Whitley Page. The instances of broken ankles and things, and also was quite high. So latterly in the war, agents were dropped. They were actually landed by Lysander and Fields because it was safer and it was quicker, because the actual operator got delivered to the right place. There are instances of agents hanging in trees with broken necks and things and all sorts, so it wasn't always clever. Food rations, biscuits and chocolate, dehydrated beef, beef and sage, dehydrated mutton, margarine, one man, and jam.
Not spam.
Or spam.
Spam.
Or cheese possessed, I seem to remember, in ration packs. And water purifying tablets, they went out with every agent as well. But if you think about it, if you were caught with a ration pack, they knew that you were obviously doing something you shouldn't be. So, I don't know how successful that was. Now, the well rod. I put this in because I wanted to show you. It's a pistol that will hold like 4 or 5 bullets with a silencer. Up to 30 yards, it would kill anybody, and you wouldn't hear it outside the room. Standard issue for SOE. Didn't make a big bang. And it was cheap to make. I think they were made for something like £1, 12 shillings or something to make them. It had a pistol action just like a Beretta. And it was fairly lightweight, but very effective. But there again, if you were caught with that, the Germans knew that you were working for the SOE, because after a while they got to know what equipment we were using. For those of you who don't know, the Sten, named after Shepherd, Turpin and N for Enfield, where it was made. One of the most effective weapons. 500 rounds in a minute. Weighed about £6 thereabouts. So that's fitted with a silencer. Standard SOE equipment. This was taken from that book I've got. It's just like ordering stuff. It even tells you it comes in wax paper and a cardboard box. One for the use of. Now, what I didn't realise was with SOE agents working wherever they were in Europe, and I've talked to John about this, French rail lines are different to German rail lines, to Czech rail lines, and Polish rail lines. You think they're all the same, but they weren't. They're standardised now. So the way the charges were laid on rail lines had to be different depending on which country you were in. Yeah. Obviously to the French one, but you can see on the cut-through how it had to be. And the detonators on the track just set it off. But yeah, I didn't realise that Polish track differed from French track. So your explosives had to be laid in a different way.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. No.
Use the same explosives.
So, I said to you earlier on that supplies for SOE were delivered by the RAF, but later on they were known as the carpetbaggers. Been to the museum, 101st Bomb Group. Didn't do bombs, but vital supplies. Eventually, our colonial cousins came over. Gee, you Brits want some stuff dropping? RAF Harrington, 1944, known as the carpetbaggers. There is a museum there today. You can go around it. Fantastic museum. With all the stuff that they were sending out to all sorts of things, right from push bikes to mopeds. Everything went out through these, by parachute, dropped off, known as the carpetbaggers. Look it up on the internet, carpetbaggers. Fantastic 101st Bomb Group. And they were using B-24s. So, I said to you earlier about German traffic, listening in. So their RDF equipment and all the rest of it there for following people. And often the case as well, what they would do was, if they were in city centres, they would go to blocks of flats and knock the electric off bit by bit in time. And if you stopped transmitting, they knew that you were in that block of flats. Quite clever. So it was ingenious, really, and it just carried on. They got quite good at it. And the two types of radios, I'll go on in a minute, that actually caused a lot of problem. There you go. This is the German equivalent of interference people.
DTI, DV.
Ofcom. That's the German equivalent of Ofcom.
The DTI.
Probably a bloody sight more effective than Ofcom are today, but there we are. But that's another story.
Yes.
That is good, yeah, we've got the signal. They're us, the Brits.
The DTI. How accurate were they?
Meters.
Got a block of flats, wasn't it, just down the street, yeah?
Transmitting equipment in the 1940s was as wide as a barn door. And you know, first, second, third harmonics. Yeah, I'll go on to that in a minute with a power set, but yeah, it's they knew within where it was, and then just within town centres, they just knock off electric. Eventually, if they found it, they knew where you were. I mean, that's quite bad. There we go. That's Eric using a B2. B2 is identical in size to that suitcase-made radio line. That's a modern equivalent of B2. Suitcase is exactly the same piece of kit. Line's a modern HF, but it works the same way. There's about 5 watt goes out of that on 2 bands. Got a range of about 700 to 800 miles, very similar to a B2. The weight is very similar. It's about 40 to 45 pound in weight. So you're carrying that. You had to make it look as
Make it look like
no weight in it, just a light piece of kit. No, didn't always have mains electric, but you had a dynamo to power a B2 of a push bike. That available in the catalogue, and that's it. So you put the push bike on a stand, and somebody would pedal away. There was more than enough power to run one of those. So, we come on to the portable transmitting equipment, the Type B Mark II. So, it's virtually the same as a spy set in a suitcase. But initially they were in wooden boxes because sending a suitcase radio out to the forests of France or wherever wasn't very effective. It wasn't waterproof, it wasn't airtight, and it didn't survive impact in a parachute in a box. So they brought these, they split it up into 2, the transmitter and the receiver, into these, which could be transported, which actually was more practical. Agents themselves had B2s in suitcases. French resistance and some of the other resistance groups in Greece and places that were going over the mountaintops, especially in Yugoslavia where it was all mountains, the suitcase was no blooming use to anybody with boxes. I've got bigger pictures of these further along. And you can see how they were strapped up, ready to be dropped out. Both pictures are out of that order catalogue again. The drawing on the right, that is what you were told when you were an agent about how HF works. That tiny little picture is all you have, the troposphere. Tropospheric simplified. Sure, it just told you how it went up and down, and it received. Well, that's it. That's the only information you were given as to how HF worked in 1940-42. That's out in the training manual. The picture on the left just basically tells you what it does and what it doesn't do. Picture on the left is from the training catalogue, shows you how to set up a B2 in a room with an aerial without going outside. You lay the earth cable under the carpet and you run the other one zigzag, and I've done that. I with that radio, just to show you how effective it was. About 5 years ago, my sister was living down in Marazion in Cornwall. The house they got was granite, like most houses in Marazion, and they had, thick, solid walls. I put this up in the bedroom that I was in, zigzagged along and ran it to the floor. I took that with me. I worked America on a 559 on CW with that setup. It works. It doesn't look as if it works.
But your hair was standing up, though, wasn't it?
But it worked. The system actually works. This is the bit that Tony will be interested in. The B2 set was actually in that pile. Tony, a bundle of faggots isn't what you're thinking, it's a pile of wood.
All right. Yeah.
That is how clever that they could hide things. Sten guns, equipment, everything in piles of wood or whatever. Camouflage. But that aerial installation was quite common. You moved into a bedroom, you stayed somewhere, you could do it. And that's... nothing's changed much, has it? All of that on the right would go into that bundle of timber on the left. That's how well they got it. During the occupation of France and in Paris, how do you think everything was transferred around the city? Prams. Germans were never cottoned on that little, John Paul in the pram with his mum had got God knows what ammunition, firearms, explosives all underneath the bedding. Believe it or not, prams were the most effective way in France of transporting SOE stuff. So there's a whole load of people in their 70s that grew up and didn't know that they actually were agents in prams. Right, go on to the radio. Two types of radio. Most of you have heard about the Paraset. It's a little folding metal box. First successful miniaturised radio, called the Paraset because it was dropped by parachute. Sometimes it's called the Wadden Mark 7 because it came from the workshops at Wadden Hall in Buckinghamshire. The Royal Signals. Is it you, Tony, that likes the Royal Signals? Yeah.
Yep.
Coverage 3 to 7.6 megs, 2 bands selectable. So you think, great, 4 to 5 watts. Great. There was no side tone on it. So you had to be pretty good listening to the clicks to know what the hell you were sending because you couldn't hear what you were sending. Built with 3 valves. It was supplied with the headphones, powered either by mains power supply or from a battery pack. It was small and lightweight, easy to operate, but had several disadvantages. The valves had to be taken out and put in and taken out. To close it, they were fitted into springed catches in the lid. So every time you had to open it, now valves don't like being played with, they don't like being switched on and off, and they certainly don't like to be going into their little holders, waggle them around and put them in. Eventually, it doesn't work. The greatest problem with the Paraset was the fact that it would self-regenerative receive. It became a transmitter if you didn't set the controls right. And this is what I was saying to you, Dave. That a lot of agents early in the war were issued with Parasets because they were small, smaller than that projector. But second, third, fourth harmonics were coming out, and straight away the DF equipment, they've got a field day, haven't they? So consequently, Parasets went to places like Sweden, Norway, Greece, Yugoslavia, where they could work in the hillside where there was no way that they could be DF'd quickly. And they stopped using them in places like, certainly in France and in Holland, because they lost hundreds of operators until it was twigged, because they weren't quite set in the regenerative control, and then the thing was self-oscillating and putting out a signal. That's it. See the 3 valves? I've got a pointer here somewhere. Give me a minute. I tried to buy one on eBay last month. It was a new one that was made to look identical to one of these. And I stopped bidding at £500. It went for £659, and I thought, sod it, I'm not paying that for it because it's pretty crap. It's as wide as a barn door, there's no side tone, but it was just to have something nice to go with the collection. The bulbs there when it's fully done. It's quite effective, but by modern standards, pretty crap. That's the back of it. Nice leaky capacitors. Quite well, it's quite compact, isn't it? Old style components, look. They've had that warm smell after they'd been on for about 5 minutes. No. No, and I guessed it probably got a nice low level hum when it was on as well. That's at the Intelligence Museum. That is actually one that was discovered in a barn find. You always hear of these things. They found it in the 1970s in a box wrapped in blankets and something else. It's now in the museum. That's an actual one that was actually working.
Jesus.
I hate to think how much that would cost now. Right, the bit you've all been waiting for, the B2. Mark 3. If you go on to the Crypto Museum on the webpage there, it's a wonderful museum. That's where the kit came from for my Enigma machine. It's a fantastic resource for everything to do with this type of stuff. And I make no apology for ripping off some of their images because they're so good. The Type 3 Mark II, known as the B2, is argued, it is the spy set that everybody's heard of, everybody knows. Designed in 1942 by John Brown of SOE Station 9. And it was made at Stonebridge Park. issued to agents and resistance group and special forces as well, because the newly formed SAS had them as well. But they had them in the boxes as opposed to the suitcase. Suitcase was no good for those sort of people. The official designation was the Type 3 Mark II, but became known as B2. Two varieties, as I've said. Leather suitcase, to avoid suspicion, was the most common. The later variant was drop pipe, no parachute, and 2 boxes. That's it. 3 units, transmitter and the power supply, all in one box. Spares were all in that side there. Now if you look at that one, it's got 3 locks. Early on in the war, German intelligence worked out most people have suitcases, they don't have 3 locks, they have 2 locks. And they were picking up agents with 3 locks. So SOE decided to change, and they started using these fiberboard suitcases. Mine here is exactly the same size. The more battered it was, the new equipment was fitted into old second-hand suitcases. So there was a call going out, so when they were making them, they actually put them into battered suitcases that looked unobtrusive. Some of them were made in wood. They were blooming heavy. So, output power of about 20 watt. Too big to carry around easily, especially in public transport. Now, I've carried that one of mine. When I finish the talk tonight, I'll close the lid and put everything in it, and you can pick it up and carry it. It weighs almost the same. It's about 40 odd pound in weight. But mine is because I've got a 7 amp gel slab battery and some other bits in it. But there was a lighter weight one, but look at the range, was at 3.2 to 9.5 megs. There you go. Take a minute to look at this now. This diagram explains to you which part. That's the transmitter. There's the receiver. Power supply. Spares. The coil, the tank coil went into there. The coils had 2 different ways you could put them in. So there was one frequency on one side, turn it around, you had it on the other. Tuning of the anode. Receive tuning. Your headphone socket. Audio volume. There's your power supply. You either could use 6-volt DC or AC mains. And believe it or not, what they used to do was plug it into the light socket, because I can remember as a kid, you could buy in Woolworths a Bakelite thing with an Edison Swan thing on it or whatever. I mean, gone today, forbid. And they'd worked out when they made this at Stonebridge Park that you couldn't put one into and get it wrong. It would only work one way with one type of thing, so you had different types of plugs and sockets for mains or, you know. There's quite a lot going on in that radio, and even on that bit there, you've got a little dial with a VFO on it that tells you where you are as well. So I've got pictures of that further down. But that's... And it all finished in that lovely black crackle finish. A bit like your dashboard on your MG beams, that crackle finish as well, wasn't it? You know. So that's it. 2 compartments. There's all the spares, spare valves and everything else. Morse key and everything else will be kept in there. The transmitter needed a crystal, top right hand. Put your crystal in there. You have different crystals. Some crystals would work on harmonics of the others, but you have to change your crystal. So all of this, you really had to be clued up with a B2. It was, you had to have as much savvy as a licensed amateur really to use this stuff. Now, I suspect it was very unforgiving. If you got the SWR wrong, you probably got some sort of shock or some RF build or something off it, I'm really sure. Suitcase version, this one is in wood. Yeah, cardboard versions, such as that one of mine. One of these sold not so long ago at auction. How much do you think it went for? Just over £10,000. Yeah. I've seen one working one. And believe it or not, it's bloody awful. The side tone is almost like some of the old Those of you that do CW, a lot of Russian stations were homebrew kit. And on the CW tone, it got chirp on it, where it was fluctuating in the band. A lot of B2s were not that stable. Beep, 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 beep. And it was noisy. There is a video on YouTube of some chap in Sweden who's got one. Honest to God. We don't know how lucky we are with modern equipment. It was hard work. So that's what I said to you earlier about the 2-locked suitcase and the 3-lock. And that one is virtually the same as mine. You wouldn't think it would make that difference, but it did. So, like I said to you earlier, the container versions of the B2, they started putting them into wooden boxes, and then latterly into watertight metal ones with rubberized sealing gaiters and grommets, whatever you call them. What is it? Sealing rings.
O-rings. O-rings.
Yeah, it would actually drop into mud or whatever. Exactly the same as the suitcase radio, but in 2 boxes. And that is how the resistance groups liked them, because they could leave them somewhere tucked in a barn or anywhere else, and it would work. It was kept dry. Airdrops over the sea, most suitcases would just not would survive such a trip. And as the war progressed, the McKee certainly wanted more and more information, and we needed more information in planning for D-Day, so more and more of these sets were sent out to the French resistance to know what was going on. And likewise that they could prepare for D-Day, so the night before D-Day happened, God knows what happened with the railway lines and things, that communications were cut, bridges were cut, you name it, all because of what was going on with these sets. And we knew about it from Bletchley, because they had intercepted German communications that they thought that the Allies were landing, because the resistance suddenly woke up at midnight. I forget what the message was that was broadcast on the BBC about telling them that D-Day was on. It was in French, but they knew that the British are coming.
Something about onions, wasn't it?
Yeah, I tried to look for it for tonight, but I can't remember. So that's it in its box, look. You can see. Both packed together in a container that was marked G. The smaller box, marked H, had the power supply. Now that looks remarkably rugged with this fibre foam or whatever it was that they used to glue in that would take knocks and things and just stop it. I've never seen one of these turned up. I'd hate to think what it would be worth. But there they are side by side. That's the power supply, and there's the spares box with everything else on it. There you go. Does that look familiar? Number 8 Morse key, standard Morse key, die-cast alloy, high impedance headphones. It's exactly the same as the suitcase, but in 2 boxes. And the big connectors to connect the transmitter and the receiver. And that could be up and running within minutes. A frequency range divided into 4 ranges, each of which needed its own tank coil with an A and B side. The PA grid frequency needed to be selected with the waveband switch, which was 7 steps, based on 2 valves. That's all it was running in. An EL32 and a 6L6. And believe it or not, they're still available. 80 years later, I looked on eBay and there was somebody selling one. And they were like 15 quid. Because they designed them to be used for valves that were out in common supply, because during the war they couldn't get, so it was valves that were used in radio receivers and things, and other equipment. You can see how thick that cord is to connect the 2. There's your tank coils, and it says on there L3A, so that was 6.5 to 9 megs. You turn it over, L3B was 7 to 10 megs. Quite clever, really. Entire frequency span, 4 coils, 8 permutations. Wouldn't it be great if Yaesu made something like that today? have a lot of fun and put radio back as it used to be.
Probably overheat.
Eh?
Probably overheat these days.
Everything now with Japanese boxes that do everything, but this was like groundbreaking stuff, wasn't it? It was simple, but it worked. And if it stopped working, you could mend it. There we are, that's the receiver board. See the connector? Built like a brick outhouse. Brass fittings. Entire coverage, 3.1 to 15.2 megs. That's a hell of a range. You have two wheels, one for coarse and one for fine tuning. And there was the scale readout. Another better picture of that readout, so like a little glass magnifying lens over it. And actually it was quite accurate. I think it was 3 or 4 years ago at Blackpool, there was one of these B2s on with a historical group that got one actually working on display on a Blackpool rally. And they were terrified that somebody was going to try and nick it. And they were working 7 megs, quite happily, working into G, working UK on a B2. So that's it. Quite neat, isn't it? Quite accurate. And there's that lovely crackle finish that everybody had on these radios. And there's your power supply. Quite a meaty looking thing with the capacitors and everything else at the top of it there. And to avoid mistakes, it was not possible to use both inputs simultaneously. You either had to have AC or DC. And that was it. It was idiot proof. So wherever you were, you could run it. Whether you've got no battery or your battery died, you've got mains power. If you've got no mains power, you had battery. If you didn't have battery, you could use the dynamo. There you go. The following voltages for the receive. .500 at 60 milliamp. A little bit different to your Yewood equipment of today, isn't it? There's the spares. That is the entire list of what you had in your spares box. Your coils, spare valves, fuses, Morse key, phones, mains lead, adapters, Edison screw adapter. And because we're not American, it's aerial wire, not antenna wire. Earth wire. But look at that. The aerial wire was 100 foot.
Wire in that side box.
Mm-hmm. Well,
There's only a little box on the side of it. You go,
yeah. Very thin wire. Didn't need to be very. But what I'm surprised is that we're working a 6 metre vertical, so the cable is what, 6.5 metres with something like 10 metres of counterpoise. That needed 100 foot and 10 foot of earth wire. The obligatory screwdriver and the operating manual. There's quite a bit of stuff in there, isn't there? Come on. So, there's its specifications of what it used. They got it right. It worked. There's the tank coil that's actually in. It says L3A, so you can see where it is, the meter selector. This is your anode tuning, and it goes for your meter at the top there. And your aerial matches. This is your ATU. So there's your aerial input wire going in. And all of this stuff was made on either Bakelite or dipped in some sort of shellac just to protect it. There you go. There's your crystal. 3.505 kilocycles. Just swap the crystals over. Take the PA tuning grid. It's no different to a 101 ZD, is it? Tuning it. When you load it up, exactly the same. power input, lovely brown Bakelite. See the mains braided cable. And these were the switches that you had to turn over to either turn it to DC or AC. You couldn't put the two in together like it said earlier. There you go, that's running it off battery power. And everything was this lovely crackle finish. There's the battery plug. It always looks as if it was going to last. It was well-made stuff that would, rough handling, it would always seem to, but I suppose if you dropped it, it would shatter. There's the mains plug. They look vaguely familiar to banana plugs that we use today, don't they? They've cleverly done the wiring loom and things are. Look at all of this. The transmitter, look. All these. I'm not surprised there's a bit of discoloration on these tuning fins. Look at it. But it's tidy work. It's very tidy work. But if you look at it, you can actually get at everything to repair it. I mean, Stuart, you do a lot of this stuff. It's easy to get at that, isn't it? Just take it out. Loads of shellac. Loads of flux by the look of it. There you go. Okay. Your receiver. Anything to save weight. Cut out bits of metal, don't need it. There's the operating instruction book. Told you how to use it, but more importantly, it told you how to repair it. Now, SOE agents, from about 1943 onwards, they were sent to RAF Chelmsford. It's still there today. It's on private property. It's a farm. All the buildings are still there. Half the runway is still there. But every SOE agent, Gibraltar Farm, this was the transfer point to enemy territory.
So I don't have wheelchair access on this.
Sure. We went for a weekend, something, I think it was one of these tours that did everything like, it was the same weekend that we went to Bletchley. We ended up in the Intelligence Museum, we went to this place and one or two others. It's still there today, it's a private farm, but the family that have it have collected so much stuff to do with it. And on the barn, on the next picture, I'll tell you why. This barn is where all SOE agents, all kitted up, all with their suitcase stuff, all with their firearms, all with their stuff, waited in this barn to be dropped into France or wherever they were going. They moved on from the Whitley page, they actually went in the Lysander. Picture of a Lysander, I'll show you why. There is a memorial here, and every Armistice Sunday there is a service in this barn for those SOE agents that didn't return. And pictures of agents, family have come here and they put pictures on the wall of their loved ones that didn't make it. And it's quite moving really that you think that they sat there wondering what was going to happen to them from that barn. There you go. They only went from RAF Chelmsford at night, and only then when there was a full moon. Flown into enemy territory on a Lysander, there was a pilot and the agent, that's it. Invariably there was either stuff to come back, or an injured agent, or an agent that was like going to be found out, so they had to bring them back. Quite often, walking the dog at night, I see a full moon and I'm thinking, this is the right sort of weather for SOE to be dropped. Quite remarkable. There's the Lysander, made by Westland. Clumsy looking thing, fixed wing with big struts, but what was great about it, it could take off and land in a short field. It was economic, it held 95 gallons of fuel. But you think about from the south of England, at RAF Tamsford. You get in it with a pilot, you cross the channel, you cross into France, you drop into a field that's been lit by resistance, by dead reckoning. The bravery of those pilots that they could do it time and time again. Invariably, the engine never stopped. They dropped the agent in the field. It was collected by the Maquis, who would either put torches out or telelamps, and off they went. They installed a ladder, because not all SOE agents were very easy, nimble. Imagine travelling all the way from RAF Tamsford across the channel, either had been sick or felt like sick or just felt... How would you feel? You dropped off. So they put a ladder there. Straight away, it eased the time to get out and get somebody in and go, because they ran the risk of being found by the Germans and they had to go. And every pilot that flew on that had 38 caliber Webley revolver in the boots, in the flying boots. There you go, built by Westland. 9.3 metres, 966 kilometres. I don't know what's that in miles.
600.
Yeah. It's a long way, isn't it, on 95 gallons of high octane? 1700 built, nearly 1800. There you go. Look at that. That's all they had to get to France. I think that's quite remarkable. Dead reckoning. There's a book out, They Flew by Moonlight, which is based on the pilots that actually took these agents, because there's very little talked about them. I can imagine getting back to RAF Tamsford after doing there and coming back. This is one that's at the RAF Museum at Hendon. This one actually still flies. It was actually in for a paint job when we saw it. And I asked for permission to go and take a close-up of the cockpit. It's a strange-looking aircraft. Like I said about the ladder, dead reckoning. On a full moon, 138 Squadron were always black. You never see them grey, you never see them silver or blue, anything. They were always jet black. They were used a lot as training aircraft, but because of their short takeoff and landing, and it's quite quiet. When you throttle back to land, believe it or not, a Lysander was almost just whistling in the wind, and it was just dropped down. It's very effective. Big wide wheels, it bounced quite happily on the grass. There we are. There you go. Anybody got any questions? Sorry if I bored you.
No, thank you very much. Yeah.